I have the pleasure. My name is Andreas König, Professor of Strategy, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship here at the University of Passau. You see in the background our beautiful scenery here in Passau. And indeed, today, it's the first time we have a real summer day, 30 degrees Celsius. It's hot, it's summery. And as you might have seen in the news, Passau is also corona-wise the leader in terms of vaccinations, and people are already out in the street, basically now perhaps a little bit too early, but hopefully not. So we knock on wood that this situation is really as shiny as it seems to be, and we are very glad about it. And today, as part of our distinguished keynote series, we are especially thrilled to have Saeed Khanagha. Professor Saeed Khanagha is our guest. And you may remember in the last 3 lectures, we had Robert Gregory, we had Kelly Martin, and we had Carmelo Cenamo, and they were speaking about issues at the interface within the ecosystem actors. And we also heard a lot about competition and incentives and so on in the platform, digital platform ecosystem. And today we hear more about the human side of digital platform ecosystem, especially in the context of the change that occurs through digital transformation more generally, but of course, especially in the course of the emergence and the development of these platform ecosystems. And we are thrilled that our today's guest is a real expert on this. So Professor Khanagha is Associate Professor of Strategy at the Vrije Universiteit of Amsterdam, a faculty that I personally am affiliated with as well. And I hope there's people from Amsterdam. Hartelijk welkom here in Deutschland. And it's great you're here, Saeed. And Saeed's work has been focusing on digital platforms and ecosystems, and more broadly on understanding the factors that determine success of organization in the adoption of emerging digital technologies at various levels. And he's a real expert. He's published in prestigious journals, SMJ, the Journal of Management Studies, Long Range Planning, and so forth. And I will not make a lot of ado other than saying, Saeed, it's great having you. And before I give you the word, I will quickly announce what I always announce for the participants. So while Saeed is speaking, you are, of course, invited to ask questions through the Q&A box or the chat. Importantly, if you raise a question or if you speak up and we have a conversation during Saeed's presentation, this will be recorded. So we will be recording, and you will later on be able to watch Saeed's presentation, but we will not record the Q&A session after about 55 minutes after Saeed's presentation. So if you want to raise a question but stay anonymous, it's wiser to raise that question afterwards. Typically, we will not interrupt you, Saeed. So typically, it's a presentation and we have a Q&A unless there's a super urgent remark. So Professor Khanagha, welcome to Passau. And the floor is yours. We are very grateful for your time, and we are anxious to hear your talk.
Thank you so much. And yes, the pleasure is certainly mine. Such a nicely planned program and nice lineup of the speakers. It's my honor to be part of this program. And as you said, I've been dealing with digital platforms now for around 15 years. I was a commercial manager at Ericsson since 2006 until last year, which I eventually quit the company to focus on academic career. But then for 11 years, since 2010, I started to look at a certain class of digital platforms, namely cloud computing, Internet of Things, 4G and 5G, which is the focus of this presentation. So I'm happy to share whatever I know based on my studies and hear from your feedback and suggestions or whatever that you'd like me to explain. Then I move to my slides because it's an extensive study and I'm happy that I have 55 minutes, although I usually don't use that much time for presentation. But this type of qualitative studies require a lot of details to convince the audience. So I hope that I can do the justice to the case. I think it's a cool case. I've put some little teasers of the tensions that revolve around this case. It's basically a battle between Intel and Ericsson that lasted for around a decade. So from 2001 to 2011, kind of, there were a strong battle full of tensions between two giants. One of them was the incumbent leader, Ericsson. The other was the aspiring entrant who put hundreds of millions of dollars to create an alternative technology. They almost succeeded, but then they failed to find a foot place for themselves in the industry. So I did this research together with my colleagues, Shaz Ansari, Hakan Ozal, and Violina Rindova. But no, I represent the whole team here in this presentation. So the topic of this study is the battle between incumbents and new entrants. So we know that when technological changes happen, for example, you want to have a substantially improved performance in case of 4G and 5G technologies, it's quite obvious and tangible. So nowadays, everyone talks about 5G, which is about 20 gigabits download speed, for example. Back in the time, the battle was for 100 megabits to have the LTE and 4G technology in place. So when you want to achieve a higher level of performance, you want to achieve a better quality, it's an opportunity for incumbents to, of course, continue what they used to do, but also for the new entrants to come up with alternatives to say that we can do something that is better. And because they are not tied to the legacy technologies, which are kind of dated, it's not always up to date, they have an opportunity to come up with something new. And if it's a prominent new entrant, such as Intel, wants to enter the mobile industry, then they have a lot of resources as well. So they can do a lot, but then they face some challenges. And the challenges are mostly from the incumbents who have the market share, they have the patents, they have the power to say that what is right or wrong in the ecosystem. And based on this power that they block the new entrants. Like I said, they use a strategic patenting, for example. They use impression management, so saying bad things about the competing technologies, or by convincing the allies and partners that you don't want to invest on this technology because it's not good for you and it's not good for the others in the ecosystems. So by doing this, incumbents, of course, safeguard their resources, because if the new technology comes, then it happens that the resources, the patents, the technologies that the complementary technologies that the incumbent has becomes less valuable. But then they can also secure their strategic position in the ecosystem. So imagine that everyone in the ecosystem is dependent on your next generation of technology, such as Intel's chips, for example, or any other technology that is kind of in a monopoly situation with a single or a few powerful suppliers. Then you can, of course, charge them more, and you can develop technologies in a way that is more appropriate for you, so you have a lot of power. So by blocking the new entrants, by causing troubles for them, you increase the barriers for entry for the incumbents, and then you are more likely to be able to capture more value in the next generation of the technology. So because of their leadership position, like I said, the patents that they have, the relationships that they have this opportunity to stop the new entrants. But it's not always the case. So it's not for granted that the incumbent can say to the others that this alternative technology is not worthwhile. It's not something that you would like to consider, and therefore just keep investing or waiting for what I'm going to develop. But what may happen is that if the incumbent is being seen that they are ignoring the interests of the others, so by others, we mean regulators, users, customers, I mean, Other powerful complementors and new ventures. So they kind of say that you just need to stick to this technology because it's something that is good for me. And if there's something else that is good for you, I don't care about that. I just want to focus on this. This creates problems for them. So for example, ignoring a cutting edge technology, cool technology, better performance, better quality, uh, delaying the technological change or sustaining a performance bottleneck. So I say that my technology has 2 megabits per second download speed. There is an alternative claims that it will give us 4 times more next year, but I just want to ignore it. Then it causes trouble for the incumbent. So the troubles range from lawsuits and reputational damage, retaliation by the other actors in the ecosystem, and also lack of motivation by startups and others who need to participate in the innovation so that you can actually sustain the ecosystem and remain as the leader. And most related to this topic is the loss of influence. So if the others see you as some sort of self-interested person, then they won't listen to you. They won't talk to you when they think of their future plans. And this is literally the case in the case of companies like Ericsson and Intel and others. The key customers sit with these type of giants. They ask them what to do next and what should be our plan for future. And if they feel that the company is ignoring them, not only it will potentially hurt their ongoing businesses and the trust that they need to have, but also they won't listen to them and they don't ask them for what would be the next step for us. So to justify our research question, which I've summarized here, so how the incumbents may navigate the tension between pursuing their vested interest in the technology, while at the same time being compliant and legitimate in the ecosystem, we need to look at what we know from the prior literature. So what is the gap actually? So from what I just said, we know that both supporting and contesting an alternative technology is problematic. Supporting is problematic because you give a boost to your rival. You tell that I myself, I'm not committed to my own technology, but I think that the alternative is also potentially a good one. Then you divert your resources because you potentially want to invest on 2 technologies. It's obviously problematic. But then, like I said, in an ecosystem, contesting a promising technology, a technology that is showing a better performance, a critical aspect of performance that everyone is waiting for it, that is also problematic. So how you deal with this tension? The research on incumbent response to technological change is quite extensive. There is a recent review by Eggers and Park, but in that review, they explicitly, I think twice say that we consider change as exogenous to incumbent firms. So they see that firms can either decide to adopt or ignore one technology, they can adopt both technologies at the same time. So making choices like that, which will prove to be effective or not effective for various reasons, but they do not discuss the ability and the possibility for the incumbent to influence the technological trajectory, like what we discuss here. So Ericsson's attempt to sustain the dominance of their own technology and Intel trying to change the trajectory by introducing an alternative. Now, the literature on battles for standardization and dominant design, they discuss this type of topics. So they discuss that some people are looking for one design, trying to mobilize their resources and their partners and alliances to make that one, that technology successful, whereas the other camp is trying to go for an alternative and eventually one of them will become more successful and the other probably will become a niche or completely out of the market. So they discuss it, but what they don't do is they really don't focus on social. Now, like Andy said, the human side, of course, we talk about social aspects, which is related to human. They don't focus on the legitimacy issues that may arise during these battles, especially for the issues that relates to the leaders. So we have some discussions about new entrants legitimacy, it's more intuitive. So you're a new entrant. You need to prove that you are legitimate. But when you're an incumbent and you're a leader, you may assume that you have legitimacy for granted. But increasingly, as I will give you some other examples as well during this presentation, we see the liabilities of leaders. So leaders are free to do whatever they want to do or say whatever they want to say, as long as the followers, the other actors in ecosystem consider them legitimate. Now, this research tries to explain that what may violate this legitimacy, and then how incumbents can deal with this type of problems. Now, the context of our study is, I think it's a nice setting because the performance criteria, which helps us to compare the two technologies, is quite intuitive. Now we have on the one side the cellular technologies developed by 3GPP consortium, wherein Ericsson is a leader. So it's not Ericsson's technology per se, but it's a technology where Ericsson is a leader back in the time, of course. And then LTE is the name for the fourth generation of the same technology. So the third generation didn't have a name, but they labeled the fourth generation LTE. I think in part related to the topic of this discussion, because they wanted to emphasize that it's an evolutionary technology, it's efficient, and it's good for the customers. And Intel was quite successful with Wi-Fi technology, which we basically use nowadays quite regularly. They decided to evolve that technology into a mobile technology. So to create a competitor for the cellular technologies, and potentially providing better performance, less cost, and more convenience for the ones who want to implement that. Most major companies gradually backed WiMAX. So I can say that almost every major player in the industry, some sooner, some later, backed WiMAX, started to invest on it, with the exception of Ericsson and also Qualcomm, I must say. But for Qualcomm, it was continuous opposition because they had their living was based on the cellular technology, so they had no option in supporting the WiMAX, and they had little interaction with customers and others, so they consistently opposed the WiMAX technology, I mean Qualcomm. But Ericsson had more interesting course of strategies that I'm going to outline in the next slides. But just to have a glimpse of how the technological battle looked like he said, the WiMAX technology started in 2001 as a concept, and it was sort of in market in 2006. So this chart that you see on the picture is about the download speed, which all of us know what it is. That's the good part of this research, so easy to understand. So from its onset in 2006, it was providing 2 to 3 times more speed compared to available 3G technologies. And until 2010, where the cellular technologies could catch up in terms of the performance, it was outperforming the LTE or cellular technologies in general, so 3G and LTE technologies. Of course, there were a lot of instability. There was a lot of technical issues and things like that, which are common for a new technology. So it was not the only criteria, but at least for this important criteria, which was quite important for mobile operators, for customers, for users to download the videos and the stream and things like that, WiMAX was a superior technology. And they actually started to capture market share. So from 2006 that they started to commercially roll out until 2011, they could gather around 23 million subscribers, which increased incrementally, but at a much lower speed than what happened to LTE. That you can see that when it came to market and started to gain steam, very quickly it reached 220 million and much more in the forthcoming year, because it was just an upgrade of existing 3G technologies, of course, much easier, and they did it quite successfully. But by this chart, I just wanted to say that it was a serious contender. It was commercially rolled out in US and Europe and many markets. Intel put a lot of money in it, so hundreds of millions. So understanding why such a technology may kind of get disappeared altogether is quite interesting. Now, just to take a look at the ecosystem, so what we mean by ecosystem and why the customers, the service providers such as T-Mobile and KPN and Deutsche Telekom, they would consider this type of technology. We can have a look at a simplified view of the ecosystem. So from the perspective of Ericsson, which was the how ecosystem looked like before WiMAX and how it is looking like right now. So for 5G, for 6G, there are some upstream complementers. So they want to create silicons and chips and things like that. Then there are service providers who work with the cell phone producers and work with the laptop producers and any other device manufacturer to give mobile services to users. All of these actors are dependent on cellular technology providers. So to develop their cell phones, to develop their services, their silicons, and whatever that they need to interact with this single technology, which is the core of mobile communication. And the advantage of having one single technology is, of course, economies of scale, because the more units that you create, the more scale you have, it becomes cheaper, it's more economic to invest. So this is good for them. The network is relatively simple, but the problem is that it's only one technology and it's a lot of power for the producer. So a company like Ericsson and Nokia and others and Huawei and others who do develop cellular technologies, they can basically tell that the next generation will be developed in 10 years from now. So everyone needs to wait for the sixth generation, for example, in 2030 or something like that. So this is a lot of power that limits the ability of other actors to innovate, to create value. So compared to this, Intel's proposal was to have a second technology. They didn't position WiMAX as a replacement to cellular technologies, but they say that it becomes a complement to the cellular technology. It can help the ecosystem to benefit from extra capacity because we have two technologies, better speed because whichever of the two technologies are more advanced, then the customers, the users can have higher speed. So it's quite nice. So it would render the core technology substitutable, which is in this sense quite interesting because you can have the faster performance sooner. You reduce the bottleneck power because if the cellular technology providers are delayed or not able to fix their problems, there is yet another alternatives that the mobile service providers, the mobile operators can refer to. But it comes at some cost because, of course, you need to think of the interoperability between the two technologies and compatibility of the cell phones, mobile phones, and devices with two technologies. It's more coordination cost because you will have some WiMAX developers upstream and some WiMAX developers downstreams for devices. And of course, you lose economies of scale because you divide the scale of the units for providing mobile technologies to two. Then, of course, it reduces the scale. Why I'm putting this picture forward is because we need to emphasize that there is no obvious better and worse in these proposals. So each of these visions have some advantages and some issues. And that makes it quite complex for the rivals and also for the customers to make a concrete choice that whether we should really focus only on one technology or we should embrace a dual technology setting. Many of the costs are far in the future, so they don't happen next year. The coordination costs are not clear. The interoperability cost is dependent on the collaboration between the producers, which is not clear. So it creates a difficult decision-making situation for the users and actors in the ecosystem, and that make everyone kind of wondering what should we do. This creates an opportunity for a company like Intel to leverage on their emergent needs. For example, the issues with internet speed on mobile phones, to tell that I have something for your needs and your customers are not happy with the performance. So please consider this. And they are very open to considering it, spending on it, and see how it goes. But eventually, it's a long-term decision. So they don't put all of their investment and all of their eggs in the WiMAX basket, but they consider it carefully. So moving away from the context of this study, now we shift our focus to Ericsson and what they did in the period between 2001 and 2010. So like I said, with the exception of Ericsson, every other company took a rather consistent approach toward WiMAX. So some companies showed a lot of interest initially, including Ericsson's direct competitor. Back in the time, it was Alcatel-Lucent and Siemens Technologies, and it was Nokia. So all of them started to invest on WiMAX, and they stayed with it until there were some hopes that it will become successful. And a company like Qualcomm also consistently disagreed with WiMAX, so they didn't change their strategies. But as I've labeled it here, and I'm going to explain what these labels mean in the next slides, Ericsson started from one strategy, moved to a second one, and yet then to yet a third one. And these strategies were not consistent and they were confusing. I was an employee by Ericsson at that time, and I was a little bit confused about the overall strategies of the organization, although I had my own view and a lot of discussions with the colleagues about what needs to be done. But the bottom line was that Ericsson never invested really in the WiMAX, but at some point in the time, they showed interest in that, and they started to do certain type of activities to show that we are part of it. But I'm going to explain the details of these strategies in a minute. So the source of our data is, like I said, my field study. So I was part of Ericsson during this period. But then after this study, we downloaded whatever internal document in Ericsson exists that in terms of WiMAX. So wherever there was a reference to WiMAX, we used them, we analyzed them, although we didn't show all of them in our paper because of confidentiality reasons, but it gives us confidence that we understand what's going on inside Ericsson. Then we used analyst, so business analyst reports and media and outlets such as Financial Times, Wall Street Journals, and this type of sources through library databases to understand what's happening in the external world. This is our analytical approach. So I want to, before presenting our findings, I want to introduce what we could extract from our analysis, because this is something that I'm going to use in the next slide. So it's helpful to first define it and to explain why it's so important in our study. So in our analysis of data, we managed to understand something that we refer to as ecosystem leadership. So what makes Ericsson able to take certain types of strategies while the others cannot, and what forces Ericsson to change their strategies because the situation changes. So the ecosystem leadership is kind of inspired from the studies on international politics. So when they want to tell that, for example, how a country can have a leadership position in international relationships. But what we present here is based on the changes in various activities that Ericsson was able to do and the reasons for that. So we argue that ecosystem leadership is a dynamic concept. So it's not something that either you have it or not have it, but it's something that you can lose or you can regain, and you can use it for certain type of activities. But at the end of the day, the incumbents' choices, the leaders' choices, are influenced by the changes in their leadership position. We identified 3 dimensions. The first one is the most obvious one. So if you ask the practitioners and many academics that what determines the dominance, lone leadership in an ecosystem, the resources is the first candidate. So if you're a company who has the most competitive patent portfolio, as Ericsson did, so we have quotation that says that whoever wants to develop something for 3G or 4G, they need some of the patents that Ericsson owns. They had the largest market share, around 40%, better than any other competitor at that time, including the merger between some competitors. They were still the leader, the relationships that they had globally. The second item is something that is mostly about the vision of the incumbent and how it's aligned or misaligned with the interests and expectations of the others. Now, the work on ecosystem, including the work by Ron Adler and others, emphasizes the importance of alignment with the interests and expectations of the other actors. So we see that as the two technologies develop and progress, the incumbent may gain or lose alignment with the interest. At some point in the time, they are more aligned, and at some other points, they lose their alignment, so they need to do something about it. The third item is that beside having a vision and beside having resources at this point in the time, the incumbent should be able to demonstrate the credibility of their vision. So they should be able to show that now we are developing the technology, something is happening, to show the customers that although the vision is far in the future, I'm achieving something that I can show to you either in a lab environment or through some trial or some initial developments through interim technologies. So in between technologies, we show that it's working and it's working well. So I'd like you to consider these three items, and I hope that we can have a discussion and debate to see whether you think that these three dimensions are sufficiently convincing, or is there something that we are missing here? So I hope that we can have a good discussion about this after my talk. Now I use this construct to explain what happened in the three episodes of Ericsson's strategic responses. In each phase, in each episode, I start with explaining the state of the competition, so what goes on in the competition between the two platforms. Then I move on to the leadership construct that I discussed. So I will explain how it will change in accordance to the changes in the competition of the two technologies. Then I explain why Ericsson took a different type of response as a result. So between 2001 and 2005, LTE was a topic for future. So it was supposed to come 10 years later. And at that point in the time, the mobile operators were focused on implementing 3G technologies. So while they were developing the 3G technologies, the LTE and WiMAX for future was starting to gather forces and start to plan for the future. There was something going on. The 3G technology was being implemented, and the 4G, the LTE by Ericsson and others were 10 years away. WiMAX was a super cool, interesting technology. Many technology-oriented people liked the concept. People in Silicon Valley liked it because you know that the cellular technologies are mostly developed in Europe, Scandinavia, and many European countries. But WiMAX was something for Silicon Valley. So it's a lot of buzz in that location, a lot of interest. And many companies, including Ericsson's direct competitors, joined WiMAX. But it was only few of the key customers of Ericsson who showed a strong interest in that. They were studying it, they were listening to it, but they were not really making any plan for investment on it for obvious reason, because they were just upgrading their network to 3G. So it wouldn't make a lot of sense for them to start to think of a totally different technology for its next generation. So in this period, Ericsson resources, like I said, was the most competitive because the only technology that was for real was cellular technology, and Ericsson had the biggest patent portfolio. WiMAX Forum, the WiMAX consortium was quite small, although Ericsson didn't join it, but many others also didn't. So it wasn't a big problem at that point. The key customers of Ericsson were preoccupied with 3G rollout. They wouldn't pay much attention to WiMAX. It wasn't their priority in any ways. And Ericsson and other cellular technology providers were implementing some 3G networks, which would give customers ability to use internet on their mobile, while WiMAX was only a concept and nothing as a proof of performance or advantage was available for the customers. So during this period, we argue that resources, alignment, and credibility, everything was in place. So Ericsson could enjoy a a leadership position in the ecosystem by defying WiMAX, by avoiding to do anything about WiMAX. Now we decouple, we separate between two sets of strategies used by Ericsson. So we distinguish between substantive and symbolic strategies. In the first episode, they are kind of aligned. We see that what we label as indirect opposition is basically putting all of the investments on LTE and interim and in between 3G technologies, nothing on WiMAX, as of many other companies. And symbolically, they said nothing about WiMAX for quite some time. They said that we are studying it, but they didn't say that we're going to invest on it. They didn't say it's a bad thing, but they refrained from joining the WiMAX forum. So we labeled this strategy as neutrality because they didn't say anything for or against WiMAX, and we refer to it as indirect opposition because they put all of the investment on the single technology. We labeled the whole strategy distancing because it was meant to keep a distance between what Ericsson was aspiring and the newbie technology that was WiMAX. Now moving to the next episode, things are changing in both camps. So in the LTE camp, some in-between interim technologies were being developed to increase the speed of internet. They would call it HSPA or HSPDA. So many technologies were were being implemented at that time, but they were not as good as what WiMAX was supposed to offer in the next year or in the next coming years. So there were some technologies, but they were not competitive enough. And LTE was still too far away. So in 2005 to 2007, many questions around LTE was still unanswered. There were not too many patents and things like that. So it was still a concept for future. On the WiMAX side, a lot of achievements were realized during this period. So they could roll out commercial networks in US, in the third biggest, largest service provider in the US, in Europe, in many Asian countries and other locations. And they could achieve IEEE standard for WiMAX, which was also a big milestone. They were recognized by ITU as the next, as an alternative standard for 4G, which is an exceptional event because for the previous generations and next generation, it never happened that ITU, which is International Telecommunication Union, they always define one technology as 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G, but only for 4G, they recognize WiMAX as an alternative. And many prominent service providers such as Vodafone and AT&T and big players who previously didn't join WiMAX started to show attention and signed up to WiMAX forum, beside their own investment and little projects that they had here and there. Now the situation for Ericsson's leadership was changing. So although Ericsson still had the competitive patent pool and installed base for cellular technologies, but now WiMAX was a reality. It had a forum with many influential members where Ericsson had no seat in it and no leverage to influence the direction of the technology, I mean, WiMAX and its ambitious plan. So there was a technology appreciated by many players, and Ericsson had nothing to claim in that regard. So in terms of resources, they were unable to mobilize anything with regard to WiMAX at that point in the time. Then they started to lose alignment with the customers who thought that it may be beneficial for them to give WiMAX a try. They wanted every vendor, such as Ericsson and Alcatel and Nokia, to come up with a proposal. But then Ericsson was saying that I don't have anything to offer because I've not done much about it. So it created a misalignment between the interests of the customers who seriously considered WiMAX and the plans and ambitions of Ericsson. And then again, the credibility was a problem because WiMAX was able to show that now it's for real, its performance is better than existing 3G technologies, while LTE was a promise for future. And the interim technologies was not good enough to counter the performance advantage of the WiMAX. So in that sense, Ericsson was facing problems both in terms of resources, in terms of alignment with the customers, and in terms of credibility of its vision. So how they responded? Now here it becomes more interesting because we see a sort of decoupling between no, we have a small typo here. Sorry. So we see that Ericsson started to show symbolic support to WiMAX. So they started to join WiMAX forum. They started to do some small activities to show that we are part of this deal and we are doing something about it. So very minor stuff, right? Nothing substantial, no investment, no development activities, but it's still they put a lot of investment on the LTE technology to make sure that not only the actual technology, the big thing will come earlier, but the interim technologies, what is needed to show that we are doing something that solves the customer's problem, they accelerated those activities and they showed more investment on it. So symbolically, in terms of minor activities, in terms of joining the forum, they're saying positive things about WiMAX, saying that we are committed to WiMAX. They started to become quite active, but in reality, they didn't even start product development activity. So the internal documents say that now the WiMAX is in a definition phase, the WiMAX products of Ericsson, but they just bought some equipments from another vendors, put an Ericsson label on it, and sent to the customers who wanted to have some equipment to see how it works or to use in their networks. So this is what we refer to as symbolic participation and substantive opposition. Overall, we label this strategy as symbolic participation. So what happened next is another change in the strategy. And this change can also be explained by the changes in the leadership position because of the change in the state of competition. So in 2007, Ericsson was able to develop some interim technologies that were much more competitive, not as good as WiMAX in terms of download speed and the actual value that it was trying to offer, but at least it was closer, it was more capable of satisfying the customer's need. And then LTE, by developing some patterns, by developing a vision of the ecosystem, vision of the LTE ecosystem and its technical architecture, it was closer to reality. It was something that was not too far away, but customers knew that what would be the next product and how it will perform and things like that. So things were quite clear, or at least much clearer than before. WiMAX continued to kind of achieve in terms of new mobile phones, new patents, new commercial networks. So the case study by Bergelman and others in 2010 explains that in more than 100 countries, they had many commercial networks. So it was quite successful. Now the problem was that the rate of progress was slower than what they needed to establish a foothold in the industry. So they were making success, but they were facing some delays and issues, which is quite typical with a new technology. But the customers were facing that problems and some really bad issues in the commercial networks in terms of quality and things like that. But then at the same time, the new commercial rollouts were slowed down. And I will explain how this was also influenced by what Ericsson and Qualcomm were doing. Now, this was the time that Ericsson had also developed a lot of WiMAX patents. They had increased their influence over WiMAX, and because they were part of the WiMAX forum now, they were not an outsider, so they were in that they could have a say in what WiMAX is going. The customer were referring to Ericsson, asking Ericsson about the WiMAX strategies. So in that sense, they still had their dominance on cellular technologies, but because of their patents and because of their presence and participation in WiMAX forum and conferences and projects that were happening here and there, they had a stronger ability to claim that we can mobilize resources when we need. Then alignment was increased because of two reasons. First, Ericsson was kind of symbolically participating in WiMAX, so the customers were kind of happy that Ericsson is not just pursuing their own interests, but they are also helping us with new proposals and with new solutions for our WiMAX products. And then most importantly, in some way is the advancement in the lab trials of the LTE, because Ericsson could claim a lot of good performance in the lab environment. Beside the interim technologies that they had developed, they could show that the LTE is for real and it's coming and it's not too far away. This happened at the same time that WiMAX was facing delays and issues. Then within the customers, many people started to say that maybe it's a wrong choice, maybe we should not invest further on it. So in that sense, by showing that something is coming and it's on the way, they could convince many of the customers or parts of the customer organization. So we had some internal tensions between the customers, service providers. Some of the departments, some of the groups were fans of WiMAX, the other were opposing this. And the problems that WiMAX were creating due to its newness were empowering the ones who were against it. So in that sense, Ericsson's claim that WiMAX is not good would always find some supporters within the customer side. So how Ericsson changed their strategies? The substantive opposition was in place, but it find a different face because it was not just about investing on the technology, the alternative, their own technology, but also they said that we have a lot of patents and we are not going to use this, let the others use this for development of WiMAX products free of charge. This was the value proposition by Intel, that they say that WiMAX is an open technology, we create a patent pool, so you don't have to pay royalties and things like that. And Ericsson said that no, this is not true because we have a lot of patents and we and Qualcomm are not going to let you use them for free. Then they started to lobby against WiMAX. So in India, in Brazil, they lobbied with operators. We have quotations that they say the regulators in Brazil say that Ericsson and Qualcomm do whatever they do to slow down WiMAX and stop this from being rolled out. And these are quite significant because, as Bergelman and others say in their case study, WiMAX basically needed 4 major operators, 4 major service providers, so that they can have a good economies of scale to justify further developments and things like that. And they kind of achieved one big operator in US, but it didn't happen in other markets. And some of these failures were due to the actions by Ericsson and also in part by Qualcomm. And then symbolically also, they started to fight back. They left the consortium. They started to talk against WiMAX in conferences. So in Chicago, there was a WiMAX conference. Everyone was there to show support to the technology. Ericsson was there also as part of WiMAX forum, but Ericsson went there to say that why their existing technologies, the cellular technologies, are better than WiMAX. So this is what we refer to as active opposition. So they started to get into a complete fight with the alternative technology. Just to show a summary of what I just discussed. So in the early phase, the new technology is just a concept. So it starts with just some buzz and some technical advantage. Technical engineers and some managers may show some interest in that, but it's not strong enough to undermine the leadership of the incumbent technology, which, by the way, follows an evolutionary path. So it's kind of taken for granted that this is the next technology because it's backward compatible, it's future-proof, and so on and so forth. So in the earliest stages, because the leadership position is persistent, they have a buffer in their legitimacy, and they can kind of in a soft way fight back the technology, not to openly fight with it, but just to say that we don't care about it, or not saying anything about it to show that they don't care about it, and keep investing on their own technology. But what happens next is that when the alternative technology shows timing and performance advantage, and the incumbent technology has a disadvantage, of course, because this is a relative concept, then because of the distancing strategy, the incumbent has no say and no place in the new technology. The leadership position becomes less powerful. So their leadership becomes challenged because of the advantage of the others and the prior strategies that they have taken. This results to what we refer to as legitimacy deficit. So they need to do something that they wouldn't have to do otherwise. They wouldn't have to support a rival technology if they didn't have a legitimacy deficit. So this is the liability of the leader, right? So you are a leader, but you are challenged, and to compensate for that situation, you start to show support for your rival. And this is what Ericsson did. Then when the delays, or if the delays and performance issues happen, then the timing, so the incumbent's technology is no better. The incumbent has a better position because of their technology and because of what they have done in the past. So they said that we have joined it, we have done our best to support the technology, but now we say that it's not working. So as an insider, you have a much stronger voice to say that this technology is not working. Again, because of regaining their leadership position, they have a buffer to this time that they have something very close to market, unlike the other time that there was a long path to commercial rollout of the new technology. They can start to actively oppose the technology. And this results in a declining membership of the WiMAX platform, and of course, a growing membership of the incumbents LTE platform technology. So of course, there is a big if here, because WiMAX could have succeeded in rolling out their technology, and the symbolic participation could have turned to active participation. Even in that situation, being symbolically part of the WiMAX is better than being a complete outsider. So in that sense, this interim strategy of symbolic participation seems to be quite important for the incumbent who wants to favor their own technologies, but face a strong challenge from a contender. Now we try to make a sort of overall model of what we just discussed to explain what it means. Now the first and I think most important construct that we have in this study is the leadership and legitimacy as a leader, which is dependent on resources, credibility, and alignment, as I just explained for you. And we explained that how the relative progress of competing technology influences the legitimacy as a leader, both in terms of resources, credibility, and alignment with the interests of the stakeholder in the ecosystem. Now, if you are having a high level of legitimacy as a leader, you can try defying the cutting edge technology, such as WiMAX, through distancing, through active resistance. But if you are in a deficit in terms of leadership, you can try symbolic participation or active participation, because it's something that the others expect from you. If you don't do that, you lose your reputation, you face retaliation from the powerful complementors and other issues. So in that sense, it's the changing legitimacy as a leader that defines what a company like Ericsson may do. So it's not just seeing in an economic way whether we should or we should not invest on it, but they should consider what the others would think of their activities and their strategies. Now we have a feedback loop here. So when you embark on distancing or defying strategies in general, so what happens is that you help your own technology because you don't invest on the rival, you just keep investing on your own technology, but at the same time, it undermines your legitimacy. So it has some good effect on you, on your progress, but at the same time, especially when the rival is promising is strong, it may undermine your legitimacy. And then the next choices that you make. But if you go for supporting the rival technology, It's something that gives a boost to the rival technology at the cost of your own technology, but it can help you to strengthen your legitimacy as an ecosystem leader. So in the times that you have a legitimacy deficit, by embarking on active participation strategy, you may compensate for your issue. You can again be seen as a leader. Now, customers come to you and ask for solutions from you, ask for a roadmap and the vision and everything like that. And then you can wait for an opportune moment, a time that you can do something against the technology that is threatening for you. But then if it's not possible for you, maybe also it's the time for you to invest on that technology. So in that sense, through these mechanisms, we see that the leadership status of a company determines the strategic responses that they make, and this leadership position is influenced by the relative progress of the two technologies, but at the same time by the actions of the company in the past, whether they have defied or supported the new technology. That's the kind of view that helps us to explain why Ericsson started from something, moved to another strategy, and moved to yet another strategy in the end. So just to summarize, what are the key points of this study in terms of theories? Now, the literature on technological change looks into the capabilities and many other issues. When we look at the ecosystems, because of the interdependencies between the actors in social settings, it's quite important to look at the socio-cognitive dimensions of technological battles in the ecosystems. So that's something that we try to incorporate and integrate with this body of research. So incumbents' effort to promote its own technology may result in legitimacy issue. And I think it's quite important to consider that the choice of technological investment is not just an economic choice, but it's a lot about what implications it may have on your legitimacy in terms of what the important stakeholders think about your actions. Then it results to a situation that incumbent may need to support a rival technology, maybe only symbolically, to be able to secure or regain their leadership position. So when we think of the technological choices, supporting a rival technology becomes important for incumbent actors, but then this support can be, at least initially, symbolically, waiting for what's going to happen later. Then they may decide to get fully engaged or do what Ericsson did eventually. So showing a symbolic support to a rival technology is something that may help organization as an interim strategy to offset legitimacy issues. It's not, it takes a while until it's clear how much you have invested on it. Maybe you can fast track it later on, but initially, because you don't want to divert all of your resources, because if a company like Ericsson really starts to support WiMAX, it increases the chance of its success. So they try to show some support, but then not fully, not substantively. So moving to the next contribution. So we talk about shaping the ecosystem to secure a strategic position, like I said, the bottleneck position, for example. So prior research mostly talks about shaping the ecosystem through innovation. So by mobilizing collective actions, changing customers' preferences, challenging the status quo and things like that. Now our study kind of says the opposite, tries to explain how an incumbent may sustain the status quo, so to stop innovations that may be potentially also valuable to happen. And they do so sometimes by symbolic participation that gives them the opportunity to buy time and wait for an opportune moment before attacking the rival. Then they leverage the users and customers' preference for predictability. So they say that know that the new technology is showing some problems. No, we have our own technology that is tried and proven, but then at the same time, its performance is the same or almost the same as the contender. And the third point, and I think the last point that I'd like to make, is the emergent and dynamic nature of a strategy making in ecosystem. So we see that there are a lot of complex interdependencies, not only creating legitimacy issue, but it makes it very difficult to predict what's going to happen next. So who will helping whom, how much they will invest. So it's a lot of uncertainty that happens. So the strategies and the communications by the firms, such as the symbolic participation that we refer to, becomes quite meaningful for participants to make sense of the future and try to understand what's going to happen. Now, what happens is that when we look at the problem from the perspective of the incumbent, they may lose or gain leadership position. It results in legitimacy buffer, permitting them to take actions that may be considered illegitimate otherwise. So for example, undermining, questioning, promising cutting edge technology may seem like a kind of not so nice choice for a company who claims the leadership position, but they can do it. But then legitimacy deficit constrains their choices. They make them to do something that they wouldn't do otherwise, such as starting to invest on an alternative technology, something that undermining their whole business, which was quite important for Ericsson because later on they faced a lot of financial problems. And if WiMAX had become a sort of successful technology, given the issues that they faced, it was quite likely that they would go out of business. And because of the strength of innovation in Silicon Valley and where Intel is based, it was quite likely that we see a total displacement of cellular technologies with what IT companies like Intel and Cisco and the others would offer. So it was a critical choice for them. In this case, they could successfully manage this, but by making some difficult and complex and in some cases inconsistent choices. Now, this view of technology strategies is not quite in line with what we know from the prior research, which is basically based on dichotomous decisions. So either we invest on technology A or on technology B, or we wait until the uncertainty is settled. So we start to make investment on at that time, or we invest on both technologies. So these are the choices that the prior research kind of offers to us. But what we see based on this case is quite different. And we believe that if we think in terms of the ecosystem dynamics and interdependencies, we may be able to develop theories in this way that is kind of more tuned to the problems and puzzles that we face in the ecosystem. So thank you so much. This was my presentation, and I think I'm very happy to have a debate with you and answer any questions that I may have created during my talk.